what's going to happen, right? Dysfunctional, self-destructive families, okay? Mandatory rape of every child coming to the school. That was the norm. We found that out in lawsuits that happened where the United Church was forced by a court order to disclose this book they had, which acknowledged that children were to be raped upon arrival in the school.
Was that rape by clerics? I mean, by
staff, clerics and staff. It was just the procedure.
That's written down.
Yeah, that was in a punishment book. Now, what happened was interesting in that case because it was referred to by one of the lawyers. There was a media ban put on the reporting of the case, and then that vanished from the media. And you won't find that reference anymore, just like a lot of this material I found in the libraries and all being taken out. The Indian hospitals where they were doing the sterilization program, and later in the film, and you can have, there's copies of the film here you can have and duplicate. The sterilization laws that were brought in aimed at Native people. The National Archives had a lot of the records of the Indian hospitals until 1999, and then they all got officially sealed. So you can't get in there anymore without security clearance. So Canada is very good at presenting a face that, yeah, we're doing this healing and reconciliation now, but at the same time, they're burying all the records. So how can you prove a lot of these things except through the eyewitnesses? And 1 in 1,000 people are going to be able to talk about this. And then when they do talk about it, the impact is terrible in the community. Like people are ostracized, suicide very often when people start talking.
It's the case of William Coombs in the documentary.
Yeah, William's in there. Yeah. It's just a constant uphill battle to get any of this out. But I'll tell you what broke the ice with this. After the film came out, there was a Native member of Parliament called Gary Morasti, and he saw the film. And in April 2007, he gets up in Parliament and he says, when are we going to bring these children home for proper burial? And then boom, I mean, it's on the parliamentary record, you know, they can't ignore it anymore. So the Globe and Mail starts reporting this stuff that we've been talking about for 10 years, and suddenly Canadians are going, oh, but interestingly enough, that was down the memory hole again in about a month. It was just buried. Canada did an official apology in June of of 2008, where they made no reference to the churches. It's like they're talking about the crime without any criminals, you know. The churches and government, like in Ireland, they got together before any of the lawsuits and they legally indemnified themselves. So they said, we will grant compensation and a public apology in return for every Native person who receives money signs off, not only signs off legal action, but like in Ireland, you indemnify the churches. They say you're not wrong, they're not guilty of anything. And so in effect, it's a way to do what they always did, which is to gag the survivors and protect the perpetrators, which is not surprising because they're in power. I mean, yeah.
I just have a question. The role of the church, why was it in the church's interest to, take these children and abuse them like that? What I'm asking, what was in it for the church?
Money. First of all, money. They were given a lot of money per child to run these schools. Constantly, like back in 1920, they were getting $113 per year per child. Most of that went into their own pocket. They didn't feed the kids often at all. I remember Delmar, who's in there describing being put with kids who had TB. He said he used to like to be on the garbage detail because when they were taking out the slops from the nuns and the priests, they'd be eating the garbage because otherwise they'd have to break out of the school at night and go hunting for food. I mean, they were starving these kids to death and pocketing all the money. They also built the residential schools on really lucrative land. And that's the issue that got me fired, because I found out that they were situating the residential schools near the main fishing grounds among very rich timber resources. So the churches were big land speculators. And when you look at the founding document of the United Church of Canada, Parliament sets it up and it gives it the power of a bank. These churches have the power to issue promissory notes, lend money, and I'm thinking, okay, so why are churches set up as banks? Well, they're the first ones into an area. They grab all the land under preemption laws, and then they're land brokers. So, I mean, it's under the guise of religion and education, they're making a hell of a lot of money, right? But it's also part of the whole culture that, and this happened all over the world, of course, they're savages, they are granted. Go back, and this is why it's very much involving the Queen of England and the Pope, because as far back as 1455, there were papal laws that said Christians do not, non-Christians don't have the right to their own land. The Christian kings have the obligation to conquer these people who are not Christians. It's the two papal bulls. I love that term, by the way, papal bulls. It says it all. But it's sanctioned genocide and colonialism all over the world. And there have been attempts to get the Vatican to revoke those laws. It's never happened. But it gave now to talk in terms of making it better because it's still in operation. We know, in the downtown AC, you see, it's like it's open season on Indians. It's still that way. So,
could you mention the story that I think is in the film about the Queen visiting? Is that in this?
Yeah.
Is that relevant at this point?
Well, I think it's all relevant.
Yeah, I just think that's really, because this is sort of distant and it's like in Canada.
Well, it was an account by William Coombs, who was a student. He used to be on my radio program a lot for about 4 years. And William, when he was a kid, he and two other kids they claimed they saw the Queen of England and Prince Philip show up at the school. This is the Kamloops Catholic Residential School, October 1964. And I checked the Queen's visiting records, and sure enough, they were in Canada for 11 days during that time. But they claim they were in Eastern Canada. This is out in British Columbia. William says that the Queen showed up, and they all went down to the school for the river for picnic, and they left with 10 children, 7 boys and 3 girls, and none of those kids were ever seen again, which was odd because they were all from that area. They were never seen for the rest of their lives. And William was coming to, in September, we're doing a tribunal in London, and we're bringing people actually from all over the world, including Ireland, Australia. We're having, I can talk about that later, but William was to come and speak about that. And we had already written to Buckingham Palace about this, asking if they can confirm or deny it, and never heard back. William, in February, suddenly, he was in good health. He was actually recovering. I had not seen him so sober ever, because he was a spirit dancer. He was getting back into his own traditions, and he was really beginning to get back on the track. He takes ill. He's ordered to go down to St. Paul's Hospital, a Catholic hospital in Vancouver. Within a day and a half, they have him on life support for undisclosed reasons, and then they pull the plug on him after not even diagnosing it. And I've checked with medical people, and you don't disconnect someone's life support system after 48 hours before even diagnosing it. So it's very suspect how he died. I can't speculate beyond that, because ultimately, what proof do you have? But it's not unusual for that to happen. And just like it wasn't unusual for Native children to be taken out of residential schools and trafficked, it was that's being well documented. So it's part of what, when you're implicating the powerful. I've had a lot of flack from that, actually, to say you shouldn't talk about that case because the Queen would never do that. I've been told. Well, why wouldn't they do that?
British talker called David Icke. David Icke. So do you know that he talks about how the Royal Family were involved in paedophilia?
Yeah, he posted my stuff for a while on his site, that case. Yeah. Oh, sorry, there's someone there in the new. Okay, is that all right?
I'm just wondering where you stand now regarding your Christian views.
About which?
Do you still have Christian views in faith?
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Do you still have
Christian views? I guess it depends how you define Christianity. I mean, I was never, when I was in the church, I didn't really believe in big C Christianity. I was you'd call it a low Christology, I think, where I saw Jesus as a teacher. And to me, the message was more what he was advocating rather than his person, being the savior and all that. I don't identify with organized religion. I don't think I ever did, but especially now after what I've learned, even if, somehow the United Church was forced to acknowledge all this stuff and they invited me back, I couldn't morally be part of that tradition anymore. It's kind of hard to talk about your own kind of spiritual direction, and I'm always asked that question, so it's not like I'm evading it or anything, but it's just more, I guess you'd call me a humanist pagan or something like that, but I'm just finding the commonality is what counts. And in fact, I'm writing another book on, just a side note, a lot of the Bible is mistranslated. When you go back to the Old Testament, there's a very different story when you look at the original Hebrew and Greek that the church is deliberately, and I didn't learn any of this in seminary until I opened my lexicon and interlinear Bible and started to say, hey, that's not what it says. You know, there's a very different story, and something as simple as the term, I often use this example, reconciliation. When you look at the meaning of these words, a reconciliation in the medieval church was when you, during an inquisition, when somebody admitted that they had erred, they were reconciled to the church by being imprisoned or losing their property or losing their life. That was called being reconciled. So, and it comes from a Roman tradition, as a lot of this stuff does, where when a rebel chieftain had fought against Rome and then was conquered, they brought him back to Rome. He reconciled himself to the emperor and then was ceremonially strangled in the forum. And that was seen as a way of reasserting imperial authority over somebody. So reconciliation doesn't mean, when they say there's a reconciliation process in Canada, what it really means is we are resubordinating Native people by this process, and that's exactly what's going on. They lose the right to sue. They're signing away the right to name the names. In the Canadian government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is going all over, presenting itself as this big, attempt to look at the truth, you can't name names. You can't use any of this information in a lawsuit. You can't sue the churches. You're not granted immunity when you speak. It's all designed to tell Native people, just, back of the bus, boys. Just stay where you're supposed to. And that comes out of that whole imperial Christian tradition, which is really a continuation of the Roman Empire, in my opinion. So there's something very different between that and the teachings of Jesus, something radically different. And so that's kind of a long way of answering your question.
So one last one.
Yeah.
I just wondered where you're at with your ex-wife and your kids.
Eleanor, actually, my youngest is 19. Claire is 22. They were both going to university, and I never lost contact with them. Eleanor's over in London, actually, working this summer. And the thing about going through this trauma is any trauma. You do your best not to share it with your kids. And I know this when I was in the healing circuits with people, and I was trying to deal with this terrible losses in my own life. I mean, they could see that I had some understanding of what it meant to lose your kids. And you don't recover in the sense that, you keep things, you keep the worst things from your children. So now they don't really understand what happened to me, and they're worried about kind of betraying their mom and feeling that they have to choose. And so, like a lot of Canadians, they don't want to have to make that choice. And so it's easier for them not to look at this stuff, and hence not to, there's a distance, and it's quite painful because my own family, after all this stuff happened, they just, abandoned me, totally. I feel like an alien in my own culture. I'm in this kind of gray zone, which is kind of an interesting process to go through, But it's a long story. I mean, I found myself tongue-tied when I tried to talk to Claire and Eleanor about what really happened, because they don't want to hear. To some degree, they don't want to hear. They don't want their world shaken up. On the other hand, they love me and they want to, so they're caught, it's just, sorry, and then you had your hand up for a while.
I just wanted to say, is it the United Church that you were working for? I mean, what proportion do you think of that church are kind of complicit in all this? Is it from top to bottom, or?
Well, in Nuremberg they said complicity is just even looking the other way.
Right.
At every level, it was complicit. The bus drivers, the people who brought the kids into the school, the coroners who faked the death records, the police. It involves so many levels of Canadian society that it's kind of like, you're putting the whole culture on trial. And
just fear of losing their jobs, fear of repercussion.
We had a forum in Vancouver once, early on in this, and a white woman came and got up, and it was really amazing because she had the courage to come. She used to work at the Alberni school, and she was sitting there with all these survivors. And she told a story of how